Hi there, I'm Eitan, and welcome back to the Wix Wiz. Today I'm going to be doing some white hat hacking. Well, not technically white hat because nobody asked me to do this for security purposes, but I am doing it for educational purposes and out of the good of my heart and not in order to harm anyone. And I'm going to be showing you how a malicious actor could potentially hack specifically the CMS or the content manager of your Wix website and either gain access to the data or in this demonstration that I have here on Postman, even completely erase all the data from your data collection, which would be really, really sad. And at the very end, I'll be showing you different ways to approach this and potentially make your website more secure and not expose yourself to different things that you didn't even know about. So if you're interested in learning all about that and more, let's get started. So as I said, today we're going to be hacking a Wix website for educational purposes, and we're going to be focusing on hacking the Wix CMS. And what I mean by hacking here is that we're going to try and either get data or change the data in the CMS in a way that the site owner didn't intend. And the reason I'm focusing on the CMS is it's because it's an area where you as a site owner have some ability to control the security or permissions. And if you don't do it correctly, you can easily lead to a situation where you're vulnerable to the type of hack which I'm going to demonstrate. So generally, Wix out of the box is a very secure platform, and they think of a lot of these security concerns out of the box. And that's why it's also very prone to being vulnerable in this way, because when you're using your Wix website, you don't think that you even have the ability to expose yourself in this way, and you do. Because you feel very secure within the Wix environment, you might make these small mistakes and essentially make your data or your website vulnerable. So let's hop in and see what we can do here in order to hack the Wix CMS. So to get started with this hacking demonstration, I am on a blank Wix Studio website, and everything that I'm showing you here is true also for Wix Classic. So it's the same techniques and the same vulnerabilities. It's because the CMS essentially works the same for Classic and Studio. What I've done is I've set up a CMS collection, so that's over here in CMS, My Collections, and I've just set up this Students collection. It's some mock data like about fake students, and it at the moment has the basic permissions that come with a collection by default. So if I go over here to More Actions, and I go here into Permissions and Privacy, then we can see here that these are the default permissions on a collection where anyone can view the content. And I'll talk more about viewing in the future because sometimes it can seem like you're letting people only view specific things when you're actually letting them view more than you intend if they were a malicious actor like myself, a hacker. And here we have other permissions such as who can add content, who can delete content, and who can update content, which update can also sometimes sound not so bad, but actually by updating content, somebody can essentially erase large parts of your collection. So it's something you have to be careful with as well. And what I'm going to do here is for now, I'm going to set these permissions here to anyone. You have several levels for each type of collection action. So you have admin, site member, anyone, site member, author, and these will essentially only allow specific people to take specific actions on the collection. And sometimes I see that people will change these permissions, and there are certain situations where changes are warranted, but I want to demonstrate how if you change these permissions and you don't completely think everything through, or you change them without understanding the implications, how that can open you up and make you vulnerable potentially. Even if it doesn't seem so, just from a plain usage of the website. So I'm going to set these for now to anyone. So I'm making my collection extremely vulnerable. Okay, so technically anybody can take these operations on this database from a Wix API perspective. And I'm going to go ahead and click Save. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up some queries using Wix data on my website and show you what these queries actually look like under the hood. So to get started with these queries, I'm going to open up the code panel over here. I'm just going to click Start Coding. And I'm going to add in a button as well, just so that I have a kind of easy UI element that I could use to initiate the query. And I'll change this to say query. And here inside of our code panel, what I will do is first of all, I will change the name of my button and I'll call this query button. And then what I'll do here is I will import Wix data. Okay, so I'm just going to import Wix data. And here I'm going to build an event listener for our button. So I'll have here our query button dot on click. And when we click, essentially what I want to do is I want to get data from my students collection. Okay, so I'm going to say here const query result equals to await. And here I need to use async await because we're getting stuff from the database. It's asynchronous. And just in order to get rid of this squiggly red line, I need to make this function here, this callback function inside of the onClick. I need to make that an asynchronous function. So here we have query result equals await, and we're going to be using Wix data to run a query on our students collection. And I'm going to do that by finding out what the students collection needs to be called in the code. So I'm going to go here to databases, and here you can see the students collection. If I just copy here collection ID, then that will allow me to query the collection right over here. And the last thing that we're going to need is .find. Okay, so that will run a query for us. And when we get this query result back, what I want to do is I want to log the items. So console.log query result.items. So the items that come back from the query. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to publish this site and meet you on the live site to show you how this looks in our console logs and inside of our developer tools. So here I am on the live site, and I'll go here into the console, sorry, not sources, but console. And at the moment we don't see anything, but I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna click on this query button. And here you can see that log that I made. So we're getting back essentially the data from the query. Okay, and this is expected because our collection is on our permissions are essentially anyone, so it makes sense that anybody would be able to run this query. And the interesting thing that I want to show you now is that this query package, essentially, that we're using inside this query library that we're using inside of our Velo code is essentially a wrapper. And it's a wrapper for an API call that your website is making to the Wix servers in order to get the data from a collection. Okay, so essentially we're fetching data. And I want to show you what that actual fetching of data looks like. So if I go over here and I open up the network tab, let me just show you that all in Zoom. So network tab right over here. So here you can see that we have the query request, okay, logged over here in the network. And let me just show you it again. So I'll go ahead and I'll click query, and boom, you can see this query request over here. And if I open this up, so I can see information essentially about this request. Okay, that was unexpected. But if I go over here, so I can see here the headers that are being sent. So this is the request URL. Okay, so it's essentially we're sending a request to atonwaxman.studio.io/_API /cloud data /item /query. Okay, that's what's really happening in order to get the items from the from our CMS. Okay, and this comes back with a response, which is essentially all of the items. Okay, so it's a network request. And since this is a network request, essentially we can make this request from anywhere. Okay, it doesn't have to happen through Velo on our Wix website. I can make this request from wherever I want. Okay, any place that I can make a network request from. So I'm going to be using Postman. for this demonstration. And Postman is a very cool tool that you can use to make network requests, and you can put in all the the headers and the body and everything, and essentially test out an API and make sure it's working before like implementing a lot of surrounding code and infrastructure. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and I'm going to right click and I want to copy this. So here I have copy. Let me just zoom in because I want to make sure you can see everything I'm doing here. So copy, and I'm going to copy as curl bash. Okay, so it's going to copy all of the information about the network request into my copy board or whatever it's called, clipboard, I don't know. And here Postman actually has a really cool tool that I need to find again. Where was it? Okay, so here it is. It took me a second to remember where this was, but essentially it's in the Home tab. We can import APIs and collections. So I'm just going to go ahead here and click import. Okay, and then essentially what it lets us do is it lets us paste in what we just copied from the network request. So basically all the data about this request in kind of like a raw format that Postman can understand and then translate into a request. So here we have like all the info about the request. We have the URL, we have the params, we have the all the headers set up that we would need in order to make this request. And if I just go ahead here and I click send, then you can see here that we got our data back. Okay, so I just got data directly from a Wix collection from outside of a Wix website. Okay, so this already this already might be surprising to some of you. Like, how is this done? Like, I didn't expose my site API via HTTP functions. I'm like, so essentially, you should know that when you have a collection on Wix and it's set to anyone can view the data, that means that even someone from outside of your website, from outside of whatever UI you build, with the right information, can get the data from that collection. And I won't say that it's easy, especially if you haven't exposed the data on your website. So on my current website, on my website over here, I built a system where I'm querying data from the collection. So that exposes a lot of information about how to run that query inside of my network tab, which is not a problem. I'm not saying that you shouldn't get data from your collections. I'm just saying that once you do that, you do open up the option for a malicious user to come in and use that information in order to potentially do things maliciously if you don't take certain precautions, which I'll talk about towards the end of the video. Okay, but as of now, theoretically, we haven't done anything too crazy. Okay, we just got data that anyways I was sending to the front end of my website. So why does this matter? So first of all, I'm going to show you some potentially more dangerous situations in a moment, so please stay along. But let me just talk just about this viewing, because I think that there might be certain misconceptions about what people have access to, excuse me, based on how you build out the UI of your website. So for example, I ran a query over here, and let's say that I wanted to display some of the information from that query. So let's say that I go over here and I'll add another section over here and I'll put in a repeater. Let me go ahead over here and I'm going to look for layout tools and I'm going to look for repeaters and I'm going to select this repeater over here, let's say. And let's do something really super basic. I'm just going to assign the items that we got back from the query to this repeater and display some of the data. So in order to do that, I'm just going to grab in like a text element and I'll put it here. It doesn't really matter which one. I'm not focusing very much here on design and aesthetics at the moment if you haven't noticed. I'll put this over here And let me go ahead and I'm going to give our repeater a name. So let me just go ahead and I'll zoom in here so you can see. So this will be our student's repeater. And then I will also have this, I'll select this heading 6, what it says here. And let's say that this will be the student name. Okay, and I'll do a very basic repeater setup real quick. So I'll do here students repeater, students repeater dot on item ready, and select $sign item and item data, and then just say that item student name dot text is equal to item data dot student. Let me just double check what the name is in the collection. Students, so we have here student name. Okay, awesome. And then we'll just assign the data. So I'll say here students repeater dot data equals to query result dot items. Okay, so here I am on the live site, and I went ahead and I clicked this query button. And you can see here that the repeater is now populated with the names of the students. And the whole reason I'm doing this is to highlight what I think might be a common misconception, and that is that whatever I display in my UI is what people have access to. So here we can see here that theoretically, based on my UI, I'm giving access only to the student names. So theoretically, the student emails are hidden, okay, and secure inside of the collection because I haven't built out anything on my website which exposes these student emails. But if you recall what I just showed you, somebody who is a programmer with not a crazy amount of experience. I'm not talking about myself. I'm just saying somebody in general. Not that I have a crazy amount of experience. Could potentially go to the network tab, find the query that got the data for this repeater, make a request to the collection, and get all of your student emails. Okay, so this is an important point, and you need to think about how you are segregating data in your website and the fact that not only what you choose to show people on the front end visually is necessarily what they actually have access to. So here, if the student emails is very sensitive, you're going to have to think about how you build your collections in order to prevent people from getting access to that. And that has to do with building out things in the back end and building different collections, and we'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the video. But I want to demonstrate a few more things like this just to scare you a little bit first, and to show you what a hacker could potentially do. So before I move forward to some of the really scary stuff, I want to highlight something because there might be people watching that are thinking like, oh, you just demonstrated something with code. I'm using data sets to load data onto my website, so I'm probably okay, right? Because I'm not using Wix data query or whatnot. So I want to dispel that disconcern. So what I've done here is I've set up the same repeater, but this time I've connected it to the CMS via dataset. And you can see here it's the same dataset collection that we were using before. And I set it so that it shows 3 items to be displayed. So very basic, like a dataset mode is read. And I set up this button here to be a load more button. So when it's clicked, essentially, the click action is load more. So it'll load more items into this repeater, essentially, from the collection. And again, this is set up. This is no code. Okay, this is just with a data set, very standard no code setup. And I've published that to my live site. And what I'll do here is I'll open up the inspect panel like we had before. And I'll go here to network. So now it's clean because I didn't have the network panel open when I loaded the page. But if I go ahead and I click load more, then you can see here that Wix makes the same exact query that I did through the code. Okay, so if you're loading data through a data set, it's the same thing behind the scenes as if you're loading data through a Wix data query through Velo code. Okay, in terms of the API request and in terms of the ability to go ahead and just grab what we have right over here, put that into Postman and get all the data from the collection and not only the data that you chose to expose to people on your website. Okay, so now we've talked about different ways that somebody could potentially see your data, which is pretty bad. But I want to explore some other things, such as how they can actually change your data, because that is even more scary to me in some ways. So let's see what it would look like as a post request. So essentially, a request to add data to the data collection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in another button here. I can just actually just duplicate the button that we have. And this one I will call insert. And I will rename this button. So this will be our insert button. And what we'll do here is we'll have a very similar setup to what we've done here. So let me just copy paste this, which always will end up making me do double work, but I can't help being lazy. And this will be our, excuse me, insert button. And so this will be our updated, our new item. And here we'll have Wix data.insert. And instead of using find here, what we'll be doing is we will be inserting a new item into the collection. So let me just add a very simple item that just has a student name. And this will be fake new student. Or you know what, this will be real new student. Okay, because this is something that we're doing through our website. So this is as if legit, okay, because I'm doing it through a button on our site, right? So I'm going to go ahead and format that. And let's just log the new item. So console.log new item. Awesome. Okay, so this is very basic functionality. Let's say you had a button that allowed you to insert new students into the collection. Likely it would be part of, let's say, a form where you could put in the name and stuff like that. But that's just to give you to spark your imagination of what this button could possibly be doing. So let's go ahead and publish that. Okay, so here I am on the live site, and we have our new insert button. And what I'll do is I'll open up our handy developer tools and the network panel, and let's go ahead and give this insert button a click. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and we can see here that we have this new request over here. And you can see it looks a little different. So it says items, and what we have here, so we have headers, but we also have a payload. Okay, so a body that we sent along with this request that has essentially the data that we're trying to add to the collection, and also information about which collection that we're adding to itself, etc. So this is all important information. And just like we did previously, we can go ahead and we can grab this request. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to copy it. So copy as CURL bash. And I'm going to head over to Postman. And I'm going to go and I'm going to import this as a new request. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to paste this all in here. And now we have this here as a new request. And this is slightly different because we're not querying data. So we're not just asking, but we're also telling. We're going to be posting. So you can see here that this is a post request. And we also have this body over here. Okay, so this is essentially the data that we're sending over to instruct Wix how to behave. And here is where we can start to get creative. So here we see the real new student. So that's what we were trying to add from our Wix website, but I can do whatever I want here in Postman. So I can change this from being real new student to say fake new student. And then I can go ahead and send this request. And it came back with the item that we added. And if I go here into the editor, then we can go into my collections, students, and you can see here that we have both the real new student, which was added through the website, and the fake new student, which was added from Postman. Okay, so if your permissions aren't set correctly, and you're not managing your data collections correctly, you could theoretically let anybody just add items to your collection. Okay, so that um, could be pretty problematic. It could, you know, confuse your database. It can maybe up your website costs or something with Wix or something like that. But it could also just display false information on your website by accident. So there's a lot of potential problems here with allowing somebody to create a post request like this to your website. And theoretically, I haven't dived into it too much, but just like we changed the data that we were sending to this specific collection, I could also theoretically change, let's say, the collection ID to another collection on the website. Again, I would have to somehow know what the names of the collections were, which is not so easy to find. So it really does depend a lot on what you're exposing on your site through various queries that you're doing and various actions that you're taking on your site. And there might be other ways that I haven't explored yet for getting this information. But theoretically, if I knew the name of another collection on your website, I could go ahead and I could just post to that other collection, even though that's not the same one that you have a query for or a post request for on your actual site. Okay, so this is posting, so this is adding something to the collection. So we talked about viewing and posting, and now I want to show you something which could be potentially devastating, which is that somebody can actually just completely erase data from your collection. Okay, so for this next part of the demonstration, I'm going to add another button, and this button is going to be our delete button. Delete, delete. Awesome. I can spell. And let me change the name of that over here in the code. So this will be our delete, delete button. And we'll set up for this as well um, an onClick event. And this, instead of query, this will be delete. And here what we'll do is we'll just have here await Wix data dot delete dot, I think it's remove actually, dot remove students. And here what we're going to want is the ID of the item that we're going to be removing. So that we'll need to get from our collection. So let me go ahead and just hop in quickly. And I know what you might be thinking, that why would I have a button on my website that can delete things from a collection? So I want to show you that in this case, you might not even need to have something corresponding on your website, okay? So just keep that in mind. And let me just get one of the IDs here. So manage fields, let me expose the IDs. So let's say we'll go ahead and grab, I don't know, Alice's ID. And I'm gonna just put that right over here. So let me say, whoops, const Alice ID. And I'll pass that in here. So Alice ID. And here we only get one stab because once we click the button, Alice will be removed. So what I'll do is I'll publish this, I'll go to the live site, and let's see what the network request looks like when we try and delete somebody from the collection. Okay, so here I am on the live site, and I'm going to open up the network tab, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click this delete button. So I went ahead and I clicked delete, and you can see here that it's a different endpoint, so it's an endpoint that's called remove. Okay, and what do we pass in? So we pass in the app ID, and we pass in the collection ID, and yeah, data item ID, etc. Okay, to this remove endpoint. So let me just grab that, and I'm going to take that over to Postman, and let's go ahead and create a new import. And let me get rid of this old one just so it doesn't get let me create a new one like that maybe. I don't want these to get like conflicted. So here, import. Okay, that's fine. Maybe I should do like a Postman course or something like that. Okay, so here we have the body, and we see that this is /item/remove. And what I want to compare here is I want to compare the headers. Okay, so here we have the headers from our remove request. Okay, I feel like there should be more because it says there are 17 headers, but maybe some of these are, I don't know. Anyway, let's compare between this and between the headers that we have over here. Okay, so user agent looks the same. Authorization looks a little different. Okay, so here we have this authorization and here we have this authorization. It'd be interesting to delve into what the differences are between those two. But essentially what that would tell me is that I might not be able to use this authorization code for a remove request, potentially. But except for that, it all looks identical. Okay, so what that would mean, basically what I'm trying to explore here is what the chances are that someone would be able to delete data from your collection without you actually having a corresponding request happening on your website. So let's say if they just had access to this post request in order to add items to your collection, which is a more frequent scenario than deleting items, would they be able to technically manipulate that and then just add remove here to the end of the endpoint and make a remove request? So I can experiment with it um, and give it a try. So let's try it. I haven't tried this yet, to be honest, so I'm trying it together with you. So I'm going to copy this remove, and I'll put it here at the end. And I'm going to leave the authorization as it was. Okay, so I'm going to leave the authorization as it was. And just the body, I'm going to copy over the body as well, because that's not something hard to figure out, because the body has the same structure in between the different requests. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to paste this body. So now I changed it to the remove endpoint. I changed the body to a remove body. The headers we saw are mostly the same, except for authorization, which we'll find out if that's a problem. And the only thing that I need to change here is I need to change the data item ID that we actually want to remove. So before we removed Alice, poor Alice. So if I go into my collection, now we should see Alice is missing. And now let's try and remove John. Okay, let's see if I can remove John. So I'm going to grab John, and I'm going to put John's ID over here. And let's see if this works. So I'm going to go ahead and click send. I'm also very excited to see what happens because I did not try this at home. So I'm going to go ahead and click send. And it looks like we have potentially removed John. So let me go back here into the editor and I'm going to refresh the collection. And John is gone. That was not planned. The rhyming was not planned. But basically, what I just demonstrated is that even if somebody, again, even if you're not yourself removing items on your site with a button or something like that, as long as somebody had the post request for adding to your collection, or even if they're very creative, they might be able to like extract this information. Like if they did a lot of research and they might be able to piece it together from various different places. Okay, you just have to assume that this can be done if you set your permissions up like I just did. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'll change the permissions. Okay, so I'm going to change the collection settings, permissions and privacy, and I'll change it so that only admin can delete content. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click save. And I'm going to get another ID here. So let's get Michael's ID. And I'm going to go here to Postman, and I'm going to change the data item ID over here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click send. And let's see what we got back here. So now you can see that we got back an error, essentially. Okay, so the current user does not have permissions to remove on the student collection. So I needed to provide some additional information that would prove that I'm an admin. And that would be something that I wouldn't be able to get unless I had access to the website as a logged in admin. So if I was logged in as an admin, I made a request on the website, and then I got whatever credentials I need, I could technically also do it through Postman. But without being logged in as an admin and doing that initial call, I would never really be able to figure out what those credentials were. And so the information in the collection is now secure from being deleted in a malicious manner like we did now. Okay? And now that leads us to the question, how can I set up my collections in a way that will prevent this kind of hacking? Okay, so I've shown you a bunch of ways that we can hack the CMS of a Wix website, and now let's talk about the real point of the video, which is how do we make our collections secure? So first of all, let's talk about permissions. So here inside of the collection settings, I think I've already demonstrated this to a certain extent, but you want to make sure that you're setting the right permissions and you understand the implications of your permissions. So ignore how your website is set up, ignore your UI, ignore what you're choosing to let people see or submit from your website. Focus only on the data. And this is the truth about what can be accessed inside of your data collection, regardless of whatever user interface restrictions you set up on your website. So that means that if I'm setting my content to anyone can view, that means anyone on the internet potentially could view all of the data inside of this collection. Okay, and the same goes for adding and deleting, etc. This could potentially be a problem because it could be that I want to set up a data collection which has more nuanced access to data. So for example, I want some people to access some parts of the data on the collection and not other parts of the data. And so I can't really set it to site member or admin because then I would restrict access on all the data in the collection to some people. And I can't set it to anyone because that would let everybody see all of the data in the collection. So there are different approaches that we can take. One would be segregation of data into different collections. So for example, we could have a collection which is private data, like the emails and addresses and stuff like that. And we can have another collection which is the names and the scores, and just for my students' example. And we can draw on the data from each place based on whoever's viewing the site and the situation and aggregate it together in some way. This is not my favorite approach. It's an approach for less coding, I would say. Like if you're less proficient in coding, you might want to choose that direction. But one method that I prefer is to use back-end APIs. So essentially what I like to do is to set all of the permissions of my collection on admin. And again, I'm not saying you have to do this for every single collection, but just collections which have more nuanced access to data and manipulating of data. So I set everything like this admin. I go ahead and I click save. And then I develop unique APIs for accessing those collections inside of the backend code of my website. So I go over here, and I'm not going to do a full demonstration of this now, but I just want to give you the gist of it. I go here to public and backend. I can add in a new web module and just call this, let's say, example. And here I can build a web module. Okay, let me just go over here. I can build a web method here, which will essentially run a query to the data collection and use something called suppress auth. Okay, so let me I'll do a very quick example. Import Wix data, and here, let's call this query, and I'll set it here as permissions.anyone, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Here, I won't have any params, and what I'll return is await Wix data dot query students dot find. So if I was to run it like this needs to be asynchronous. If I was to run it like this, then essentially what would happen is we'd encounter a problem because you would need admin permissions to access. But in the back end, I have a way to circumvent this, and I can do it by passing in an option here to find, which is suppress auth. And I can say true, and essentially what this means is get the data using the query, no matter what the permissions on the collection are. Okay? And now that I have the data from my collection, I can, instead of returning it directly, I can say here, for example, const query result. I got sucked in. I'm showing you more than I intended. Query result. And then here what I could do is I could say const items to send to front end. Okay, and this here, I would create a new object with just specifically the data that I wanted to send to the front end. So for example, the name and the score, okay? And I would leave out the email. Okay, I'm writing a little bit of pseudocode here, and I would leave out the email, let's say, which is something that I don't want to be exposed to everyone. And then I would just return those items. So this here, essentially, I've created a way for the front end of my website to get partial data from the collection. And a malicious hacker who's doing what I was doing from Postman or from wherever wouldn't be able to access the collection using the standard API because they would hit the problem of not having admin permissions. And even if they tried to use this web method, which is a whole nother topic for hacking, which we could talk about. So if you're interested in learning about that, let's leave another comment below, please. But even if they were to technically hack and access the backend web method, they still would not be able to gain access to the sensitive data in the collection because I've built the web method in a way which protects that data and only exposes the data that I want to expose. And that's even though the permissions here are set to anyone. And this is essentially my preferred way for dealing with complex permissions requirements on websites. So I'm going to wrap up here. There is a potential for a number 2 to this video, so if you're interested in seeing that, don't forget to comment. If you found this either entertaining or informative or both, don't forget to give a like and subscribe to the channel because there's new content like this every week. You even have the option now to become a channel member, which can give you access to my course. It can give you access to videos early. So you'd be able to see a video like this, for example, like 3 weeks in advance. And depending on the membership level, you would have access to either member-only QAs, live streams, or live stream priority. So like you could ask questions in the chat and I would prioritize you and your questions over other people's questions. It's also just a nice way to support the channel and make sure that I can focus on creating videos and don't get distracted by the monetary needs of my day-to-day life. So if you're interested in that, then please take a look at the memberships as well. It's just kind of this like join button under the video, assuming you are subscribed. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.